respective fields wherever you are. And that's why if you see the problem solving, I think problem solving is something that all of us use and all of us will end up using throughout our life. And it can be a problem solving for your own personal space, or it can be a professional space. But end of the day, what you do is solve a problem, right? That's why this skill is so important. So this is very close to me. It's concept to value. I think in physics, you would have read the difference between distance and displacement, if you remember. If you go around a circle of radius r, if you complete the circle, you cover a distance of 2 pi r, right? But what is your displacement? Zero, right? Very similarly, in this whole problem solving world, right? Unless you realize a value by solving a problem, the displacement is zero. So the value realization is very important in this whole journey, and concept to value is how you define a problem, how you conceptualize a business situation out of that, how you solve the problem, and then how do you derive the value realization of that is what is called concept to value. I think this journey is very important so that you get to the last mile of a problem solving technique. I know you guys are doing courses in design thinking, critical thinking, so these are not new to you, right? So the reason I have put that on the top slide is critical thinking is about how you are analyzing a problem. It is about a mindset of thinking about a problem. Design thinking is a methodology, how you solve a problem, right? It's a framework that is defined. That design thinking is not the only way to solve a problem, correct? It's just one tool available. Like earlier, optimization we used to do using Six Sigma, right? But that doesn't mean that Six Sigma is the only tool available for optimization. Same thing here, design thinking is not the only tool, but it's a very structured tool to solve a problem, and that's why I have put it here. And problem solving. Problem solving is again, it's a journey from concept to value realization. The reason I put it here is most of the skills are all acquired skills. So if you systematically put this as a behavior, if you apply for every problem to be solved with this manner, by the end of your college term, you will be very comfortable solving any problem. And this is something that you should surely try and apply to all your problems, whether it is your personal problem or professional problems, because it's end of the day is a journey and a workflow. So skills, for example, is a qualitative thing. You can't measure skill, but what you measure is the ability of that skill. And that's why when you say skillability, skill is the behavior, and ability is the proficiency, that how proficient you are in that skill. And most of the skills, be it critical thinking, design thinking, or problem solving, you can be proficient as you practice more on these techniques. One important thing, if you see the boxes below, there is a hard skill and a soft skill, right? Most of the current world, even if I take 30 years back, for us, many of these skills were not that relevant. But as the landscape is changing, if you see the hard skills of coding, analysis, if you see digital marketing, these are all hard skills that you learn, right? At least my personal opinion that in next 5 to 10 years, these boxes, the name of the box will reverse. What you see as soft skills will become a hard skill, and what you see as hard skill will become a soft skill. Because you know, because with Gen AI and all other new emerging technologies, most of these things you won't need anyone to do it. Somebody will do it for you. But what will not be done is the emotion and the human part of the soft skills that you can't outsource to any of these tools. And I very strongly feel that these boxes will reverse, and I am seeing it at least when I came out of Accenture. People have started evaluating people, means all newcomers on the softer skills more in terms of how good you are in the problem solving skills, because technology now tools, you don't need specializations in technology, right? And what you learn today may not be relevant after 2-3 months. So that's why the soft skill box is very important, and problem solving is part of that, and design thinking. So if you see here, right, you can only solve when you know what to solve, right? So here in problem solving, it is important that you identify the right problem, because only when you identify the problem, then only you can solve the problem the right way. So here, problem exploration is the first step, and then you ideate a concept and a solution, and then you reach to a problem solution. What the outcome of that is, it's either a continuous improvement, it can be an innovation, or it can be any solution, service or product. It can be anything out of that. The last end, if you see, is what I spoke as concept to value, that it has to give you some value realization at the end of this whole journey from concept to value. Now, this is the workflow. I spoke about the design thinking framework, right? From problem exploration to problem solution, that's where the design thinking framework comes into play, of how you apply the design thinking framework to get from problem exploration to value realization. So I'll explain how we normally do that here. So if you see here, right, this problem exploration, ideation and problem solution, and if you relate this one, this is called the double diamond design process. Basically, this is the design thinking principle and the framework. In the center, you see the eye, and that is where the ideation main happens. And this was derived almost 80 years back by the Design Council, which used to be CID in those days, which is Council of Industrial Design in those days. So they have come up with this design thinking framework. It is, again, the steps doesn't change. The only thing that I explicitly changed here is the central block of I, which is ideation, because that's where we'll spend some time in terms of how do we ideate to arrive at a solution. If you see here the steps that are arranged, right? Discover, define, you discover the problem, define the problem, develop the problem, and deliver the problem. I'll just get into the details of each step here. So discover with empathy. So what does that mean? What is discover with empathy? Why the empathy word is used here? Can anybody call out? See here, problem discovery is with talking to stakeholders. And whenever you are talking to stakeholders, there is an emotion element. You have to understand the user problem, because the end consumer of the solution is a stakeholder and a user. And that's why it's always called the discover with empathy, because you have to understand the stakeholder with empathy to understand the problem better, correct? So here in the first step, if you see the diamond, this is the first step of discovering the problem, where you talk to the stakeholders. On the left hand side, if you see the tools and methods that we use as part of design thinking. The first one is user journey mapping. I will not go into the details because these are all available. But the importance of user journey mapping is that you put all your stakeholders and users, and you just draw the complete user journey of the problem statement. That way you get to know where all the user is happy, where all the user is not happy, and that's what the points that you pick to solve and get a very specific solution around that. Next one is user diaries. User diaries is, again, it comes from an earlier concept of ethnography is the subject, which is a very qualitative analysis of a problem. So you talk to the user and you start putting all the details that you discussed. So it can be a qualitative recording of the content, or it can be a session that you can record as well. So it is primarily to understand what is the user feedback about that particular process for you to understand the problem. The next one is service safari. In service safari, it's basically you become the user. You become the user for a while and you try to experience yourself that what are the pain points for you to solve a problem. And the last one is user shadowing. So user shadowing is one step where users do a reverse role. You become the user and the user becomes the problem solver for you to understand and experience the problem firsthand. So what are we trying to get out of this is discover the problem. So the whole intent of this step is to discover the problem here. So construct the context. So I think the words are very important, right? Every problem is contextual. Every problem is contextual. When you see, if I feel hot, right? It can be the temperature which is hot, or I might be standing in front of something which is hot and that's why I'm feeling hot. So the context of the problem is very important here, because unless you have the clear context of the problem, you can't design the problem well. So that's why it is said construct the context first. That what is the context of the problem for you to design it well so that it can be developed the right way. So you have again multiple tools to do that. User personas are, so there is something called materiality assessment, that for every problem you can draw the multiple number of stakeholders who are the consumers around that problem. So you take each of those stakeholders and then try to put all the details of the stakeholders in terms of the demographics, experience, behavior, everything, so that you know when the solution is ready, who would consume that, and are you able to address to all the points of that stakeholder. So that's the whole context of user personas. Brainstorming is about getting everybody. So brainstorming is about getting all the stakeholders into one room. It will have the ideators, it can have the stakeholders who are the consumers, everybody coming into a room and just brainstorm about what the problem is for you to derive a construct out of that, what can be the problem statement. The last one is design brief. So design brief is very similar to the earlier one what we saw. It is about qualitative recording of the discussion with the user. So here, because every user needs to be spoken about the context, because you have, whenever you create a solution, the solution should not be for a context or a situation, it should be for all contexts. So for you to understand the stakeholders and the context around that stakeholder, it is important for you to have a design brief so that you capture all the situations possible for that user. So if you saw that I in between after discover and design, right? This is the ideation phase where I think on the left hand side, if you see the input ideas. So again, when we do ideate is done by lot of ideators, right? And lot of ideas and lot of solutions that come from various people. So the number of ideas that come, it can be many. It can be unclear because we are not at a stage where we are clear of what's the exact problem. So it can be random, it can be unclear, it can be broad. The idea of the ideation process is to actually cleanse this and get to a point where the idea is clear, which can help you develop and test the real problem, right? And that's why if you see on the right hand side, once the ideation phase is done, your outputs are more selected, it is more planned, you have more clearer ideas which you are able to do during the ideation process. So what are the few things that you need for an ideation? So you need all the stakeholders. Ideally, all your stakeholders include the end consumer should be there, part of the discussion. You should have one facilitator because you need a moderator to moderate the discussion because it will be from multiple stakeholders. And then you need one impact stakeholder who can understand the end impact of that problem so that you can create the right KPIs and the success of that problem solution. there are some tools that are required, and again, it's basically you have design thinking checklists and the setup that are required, again, to capture and record what all you discussed during the ideation process. So these are some of the rules I think at least everybody follows. I'm not calling out all the rules, but these are some of the rules that are very critical. There is no bad idea, right? So again, you might be designing a chair, doesn't mean that always it should have 4 legs, correct? So somebody might say it can have 3 legs. Somebody might say it should not have any legs, correct? It can be a hanging chair, for example. And that's why it's very important that don't constrain any solution at this point of time. Let it come the way it is. And that's what is actually called divergent thinking, right? That everybody should bring what they think is right. And it should be consolidated to find out a cleaner solution. The next one is capture everything and everyone. So I think all the stakeholders that you have in the room, it's very important that you capture everybody's inputs, because you don't know, everybody will have some level of merit and experience which can bring value to your solution. Go for hybrid brainstorming. So what happens normally in a real world situation, the number of stakeholders who participate in a brainstorming session is 20, 30, because the problems are complex, right? In those scenarios, it is very difficult that there are 2 steps. Hybrid means it's 2 steps. First is individual brainstorming, and then it's a group brainstorming, right? Individual brainstorming normally happens in isolation. Once you consolidate all the individual brainstorming inputs, you get into a room for a group brainstorming session. So that's why it's called hybrid, because you can't do everything in one shot, because it takes a lot of time, because it's slightly more complex to manage it. The last one is quantity over quality. So this is an input to the ideation. Again, we saw in the previous slide that accept everything, right? We have not got to the quality stage yet. The quantity and if all the inputs that are coming are important. So that's why it says quantity over quality at this point of time. So these are few of the considerations that we take during design thinking. The first one is opposite thinking. So when we are solving a problem, right, the main intent is that we are critical enough to break the solution, right? If we are able to break the solution internally, then chances that somebody will break from outside is much lesser. So to make the solution foolproof, opposite thinking is very important, that you try to just be critical to break that solution. That's first. Tech trends and metrics, because technology has a big, industry trends and technology has a big role to play in any solution. So whenever we are doing a design thinking or we are conceptualizing any problem, it is very important to keep the technology and the trend in mind, because those are the things that will be used for you to implement the solution eventually. Another one is analogy thinking, which is more around most of the problem would have solved in some shape and form. If you take an example, say retail problem, right? You have retail concept in banking as well, and you have retail in consumer as well. But the construct of retail remains same. The overall value chain of a retail will remain same. So whatever has worked in one retail space, you can take here as well to just have an analogy in terms of what has worked and what hasn't worked, right? You can always have that picture. The next one is selection. Once you have all this various thinking and multiple points coming from every individual, then the selection step is to make it much cleaner. You rinse most of these ideas, you put it in a way which is more consolidated and which can be comprehensible. That's the whole intent of selection. Once you have the selection done, then it's the concept development. So problem, you first decide the problem, then you have the concept development, then you have the business situations, and then you solve the problem. And then you do the value realization. These are the 4 or 5 steps that you follow. So that's what is concept development. Now that you have consolidated all your thoughts and the ideas around the solution, concept development is about you create a business context and a solution context out of those inputs. And the last one is pitching. So again, last step is about pitching so that you can pitch to everyone that these are the consolidated output and the solution that comes out after the discussion and the brainstorming of the ideation session. After ideation is the development. Now we have the concept and the context all defined. Now it is time for developing the solution, right? So these are the three methods or the tools that are available. And in develop, these are the three things that are normally used together, not in isolation. Service blueprinting is very similar to user journey, if you remember what we did in the discovery phase, right? Here the only difference is that here you take the concept and actually put the concept in the user journey, because now you have the solution to an extent. The next one is experience prototyping. So here you don't create the end product, but you create a prototype to just test the experience of the end consumer. And the last one is the business model canvas. So business model canvas is about taking the complete end-to-end problem scenarios and document it in terms of, now that you are taking the prototype to a user, what is the user response, what is the user feedback, because this is iterative. If you have seen the model of the piece of the design thinking, this is completely iterative, right? And that's why the feedback in the develop stage is very important, because those feedback needs to again go back to your solution. The last one is around validation. So it's again, now that you have developed a solution, you will have to have a predefined user script to test all the scenarios, right? And when I say scenarios, it is about all scenarios, all users, because now for all the stakeholders that you had in mind to design and define the problem, you have to have all those customers and the stakeholders to test each and every solution and the designs and the end solution that you have made for each of them. So here scenario mapping is one. So for every stakeholder, you have to create the end-to-end test script for you to test all the possible situations for that user. And that's what is about scenarios here. So I just wanted to discuss one problem which is generic, and we all go to shops and we all have some retail experience, right? So I just wanted to bring one situation and then try to show you in terms of normally what is the approach to solve a problem here in this case. So if you see the problem, I don't know if you are able to read it, I'll just read it out for you. So at a retail store, customers have complained about the cash operator, claiming that the cashiers were not very helpful and they were not paying attention to the customers. Several complaints noted that cashiers were more interested in chatting among themselves than answering customer questions. So now this is the problem and the feedback that came from the customers. So this is the situation actually. So what did the store do in response? So Mary, the supervisor, developed a rule that, because the complaint was around customer satisfaction, and they perceived that the cashiers were talking among themselves and they were not attending to the customers. So what did the store manager do? She developed a rule stated that cashiers on duty may not talk to one another when customers are present. She informed her boss of the new policy circulated to the cashiers and felt that the issue had been adequately resolved. So customer feedback was they were talking and they were not attending to the customers, the cashiers. The store manager right away acted, saying they brought a policy that you cannot talk while you are attending to the customers, and they circulated to all the cashiers. Okay, and they thought the problem will get resolved. So this was the response. So if you see the impact and the subsequent observation, right, it might have worked for a day or two, but next week again the same problem surfaced. So what do you think? So now if you relate it to the discussion that we had, that to solve a problem you need to know what is the problem. So in this case, they, without even doing a due diligence of what the exact problem is, they sent out a notification in terms of what the do's and don'ts, and the problem still lies there after a week. Okay? So this is the importance of why the problem definition is very important. So what do you think would have happened and what is the right thing to do is the question, correct? So any idea what should have happened based on what you heard so far? And this is a very generic customer experience example, because all of us go to stores, all of us have different experiences, right? So obviously, if you now, yes, please. Stricter action, okay. Anything else? Sorry? So my first question, is the supervisor aware of what the situation and the problem is? Okay. Yes, so now because the supervisor never spoke to any of the customers or the cashiers, so she's not clear in terms of what the on-ground situation is, right? So Mary had misidentified the problem. She has misidentified the problem. She thought that just talking is the problem, right? But she did not do the right due diligence that was required. Now, if the problem has to be solved, right? Now let's take the design thinking principle step by step and let's solve this problem. That how we would do this. First is empathize, right? That's what the first step was. That, and empathize is, as we spoke, it's about more emotion. You talk to the user and understand, and it's always about talking to all the stakeholders to understand the multi-dimensional situation that might come from various stakeholders. So here the most important thing to note that there are two ways to solve a problem. Either you solve a problem or you solve the cause of the problem, right? The moment you solve a problem, it's just like taking a medicine for fever. It might go away, but it might not resolve the root cause of your fever, right? It's just like the example that we discussed here. So here, how do you identify the cause of the symptom, and you try to solve the cause of the symptom rather than the symptom here. So now we will try to define the problem. So this is, I think, the most important part of this. I don't think it is readable there, right? Okay, so it is more, what it's called is, you can't read, right? It's so what it's trying to do is that you create a flow chart with all the possible scenarios of the problem, right? So first, I will read it out for you in case. So cashiers perceived as unhelpful. That was the starting statement of the customers, right? That's the feedback that came up. The first thing to analyze there is that all cashiers perceived as unhelpful. If the answer is yes, then is the expectation clear? What they're supposed to do, correct? If the expectation is clear, then training is problem. So you know the expectation, but still you are not able to deliver, which means there is a training problem, right? If the expectation is not clear, then anyway the person might not have undergone any training at all, right? Then the effectiveness doesn't come into play. If you go to the other side, if all cashiers were not perceived as helpful, then the question comes is that, is there a tenure factor? Somebody who is there for quite some time in the store, they might be doing well. Sometimes maybe the cashier who is new might not know of all the customer related scenarios, right? If that is the case, if the tenure is a factor, if the answer is yes, then if the employee is tenured and still the performance bad, then the actual performance is bad because the guy is there in the system for long and it's a consistent performance, then its performance is an issue. If that is not the case, then again, if tenure is less, then the training might not happen properly for that person to know what needs to be done during that scenario, right? So eventually, if you see those two colored boxes, now that is the common endpoint of both the threads where it says training can help the customer service. So now if you see, if Mary would have done this exercise, Mary would have come to a situation where the problem she understands and the response to that problem would have been a proper training to those cashiers and the reps for them to know how they need to manage the customers, correct? And this can be applied, this method can be applied to any problem. And this is a foolproof mechanism for you to derive the right solution. So it's again, now that you know what the problem, training is a problem, as part of ideation, you ask a set of questions, right? They were not aware of how they should be greeting the customers, because it can be with anything. A customer, if not greeted, might not be happy and the customer feedback might go down, right? It can be any of the reasons. It can be, for the second one, they were not aware of how to deal with customer requests. There may be so many scenarios that can happen for a customer feedback to be bad. So these are and this may have more number of questions. The intent of this ideation step is to go through all possible scenarios for you to come to a point where you have explored all possible scenarios to derive a contextual solution, basically. So here again, in test and validation, now that you know that training is a problem because of which it has caused a low customer satisfaction, test and validate what it should do. Wherever you had feedback issues from the customer, now you actually train those people and then try to see whether the training is working fine and the customer satisfaction is improving or not. If in spite of that, the customer satisfaction is not improving, the only reason is that the training is not effective. That is, you are left with only one reason for that to happen, correct? Otherwise, this should answer and solve your problem, this last one. And again, it comes to the concept to solution to value, because now that you have, so in this problem, what is value? It's basically customer satisfaction, because if customer is happy, you have a repeat business. If you have a repeat business, your business value goes up. So, and that's why it's called concept, where you actually design the problem, you solve the problem, and then you create a value to see whether it is making the end consumer happy or not, right? So that's where it says concept to solution to value. So here, ideally, if after the training you see the customer feedback is improving, you know the value is achieved, because that was the whole intent where you started the problem with. I think that's all I have, and I wanted to keep some time for questions in case any questions you have. We can solve multiple problems. So I wanted to solve few more, but I don't think we can do it here in a 1 hour session. Ideal thing would be a smaller groups and you actually solve your own problems. I think that would be best way to do this. But I don't think with our scale here we can do that. But I can take any questions if you have.
Sorry. So actually, whatever the explanation you have provided related to the ideation and problem solving and all these, especially design thinking. So, all in a group of 5 to 6 students, they are having this specific assignment that they first of all they need to identify the problem associated to with themselves only within the campus and which is directly related to them. So first of all, they need to identify the problem, and later on they need to use the various concepts which they are learning in the classroom related to critical thinking. So after applying all these concepts, they need to come up with a solution. So although probably the direct questions is not coming to you, but whatever you have explained right now as of related to the design thinking, I am having this confidence that this information will definitely help them to create the solution, the problem they are going to identify.
I think it makes the solution very foolproof. And what you have given is the right thing to do. You can pick up any problem that relates to you. It should not be somebody else's problem.
Yes.
And the moment you do that and apply this flowchart mechanism, I think you will have a better solution and a much clearer solution, which is foolproof. I can understand because it's just 3 months in the runway, right? So, yeah. And companies also have started changing. I think companies also have started changing in terms of how they evaluate an individual.
So how does brainstorming help shape ideas?
Brainstorming is more of a divergent thinking, right? As I said, brainstorming has 2 parts.
Hello sir. So I have one question. How do we turn the random ideas into the more clearer ones? Yes sir.
Yeah. So I think to answer the first one in terms of the brainstorming, right? So if you see the components of brainstorming, you have all the ideators, you have all the users, right? And you have one moderator. The intent of a brainstorming is to get all the divergent thinking in the room. So if you have 10 users who are the consumers of that whole service or a solution, you get all the 10 users and try to hear out each one's problem and the user journey, right? That helps you create and list all possible user journeys and scenarios that can happen, because your solution, what you create, has to address to all the users, right? And the moderator's job is to consolidate all the inputs to create a very clearer solution that might be required to address to the stakeholders. That's the whole intent of brainstorming. So the other question to your point is more around, so you asked more specific to the question, right? So I think ideas is again, end of the day, ideas will be random, right? Unless you cleanse it, it will always be random. And ideas, if you don't contextualize to a problem, you will not be able to define it. Correct? That's what we saw. So when you have multiple ideas, if you see I will show you that slide which might help you answer that. So if you see here, the whole intent of ideation on the left hand side, right? You will have many ideas, many users, random. If you see the word random is used, right? People will come, like the chair example I had given. Somebody will say that I want a chair with 3 legs. Somebody might say 4 legs, right? Unless you contextualize those random ideas to that problem, you will not be able to cleanse it and clear the thoughts. So that's the whole intent of ideation, that you get all the inputs and then you put it in context where that solution has to be applied, and that's when you try to I would say discard those which don't fit into that context. That's the whole purpose of ideation process. So if, for example, in the chair, the example that I had given, if somebody is saying that I would like a hanging chair, for example, but if you don't have a place to hang, then that solution is irrelevant in that context, right? Then you have to have something either with 3 legs or 4 legs. So context will decide whether that random idea works in that situation or not. Yes.
Good evening, sir. My question is, how do we differentiate between the information, like credible information or biased information, especially researching online?
I'm sorry, credible information and?
Biased information.
In this context?
Yes.
See, it's again, end of the day, if you are looking for a public information, right, nothing is curated, okay? And in design thinking context, I would say the whole, when you do the brainstorming and the due diligence exercise, if it is not fitting into any of the context, you have to discard that. If it doesn't fit into any of these contexts, because you are trying to solve a very specific problem. If it doesn't fit into that context, then the relevance of that whole information or the insights that you are gathering is not relevant, right? That's how you can eliminate those things.
Thank you, sir.
But one thing I will say that this, at least this framework is very important. Keep applying it to multiple problems. Means you will have a very good hold when you do it for few problems yourself. And the problem should be your problem. Then you can actually see and realize the value of that. Means doing it once will not help you. You have to do it few times for few contexts and problems.
So how is user shadowing is an effective method?
See, user shadowing is a very effective method in the sense, I'll give you an example. For example, if you are trying to create, say, a banking solution, correct? Unless actual problem he goes, you will not get to know what type of people comes, how they talk to him, what is his workload. So user shadowing is, you are shadowing that user. You are actually doing that user. You become the user, and you experience the problem of the user. So that's why it's very effective for you to know the emotions that user goes through that during his 9 hours, 10 hours, whatever the job is, right? And that you do for all the users. Means what I called out is only one user. In that problem statement, you might have 10 users. You'll have to do the same thing for all the users.
So what biases might affect one's judgment and how do we overcome it?
So normally the best way to remove the biases, and that's why we have divergent thinking here, right? People come with biases, and that's where two concepts, if you considerations that we spoke. One is the critical analysis of a thought, where you try to break that. So whenever you try to break a solution or break a point of view, that's when the biases goes away. You might come with your biases, but the other person will critically try to contest that thoughts, right? And that's how gradually it gets eliminated. If the critical thinking is not able to break that or eliminate that, that might not be a bias at all. So that's the only way to do that.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, so earlier you mentioned about the qualitative and quantitative analysis. So my question is that how do they both work together, hand in hand?
So the way normally, and this is a concept not only in design thinking, right? Even as you do more research, research also has a qualitative and a quantitative analysis both, right? Always, so it's called mixed analysis in research parlance, right? It's where first you try to do a qualitative analysis to find out what the outcomes of qualitative analysis, and then you try to validate it with quantitative. So let's take an example, right? For qualitative, normally what you do, you talk to the users, you just try to note down all possible point of views the users have. What is quantitative? Quantitative, you can convert the same thing into a survey, convert that into a quantitative score, and just see whether the scores and the qualitative inputs match or not. So normally both have their merits, but the best way is to do a mixed analysis where you first do a qualitative analysis and validate with your quantitative data. That's how it is done normally.
Thank you.
So the methodology in research is called mixed analysis.
So, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for this very knowledgeable session. As we conclude today's event, I want to reflect on the invaluable insights that we have gained today. Our journey through critical thinking has been transformative. A heartfelt thank you to our esteemed guest speaker. Your experience and passion has truly inspired us, providing a fresh approach to problem solving, critical thinking, and innovation. I would like to take this moment to express my sincere gratitude to everyone who has contributed to making this event a success. A special thanks to our campus director, Dr. Sunita Patil, and our associate dean, Dr. Venkatadri, for their unwavering support and guidance in making this event possible. Of course, to our organizers and volunteers, thank you for your dedication